Well, today we are really excited to have John Gibble. He is the owner of Home Instead, and they are a company that's located in Lancaster and serve the Lancaster community, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, and so we're excited to have John here. Many of you have asked us questions about what do I do? I'm noticing mom, something's going on with mom, or something's going on with dad, or I personally have issues. And so we got to talking with John and thought, it makes sense for us to have this conversation. So John, thank you. Thank you so much for taking time to come out and give us maybe some insight on what people can kind of do as they're planning for this. So we thought we'd start with the question, what is it? John, what does your company do?
Thank you. It's really good to be here, Wendy, and thanks for the invitation. It's a big topic, and it's a broad topic, and it's a deep topic, and it's one that carries a lot of personal pain in some cases, and personal challenge and personal questions. It's an easy topic to sort of avoid until you can't, and then at that point, a lot of times it just becomes for some challenging for sure. So grateful to be able to talk a little bit more about that. Home Instead, or our company, and really just kind of thinking broadly about home care as a whole, provides a resource for individuals, for couples, to often stay in a setting that they have decided they would like to be in. Sometimes that's a home they've been in for 50 years. Sometimes it's an independent living setting on a retirement community campus that they have moved into recently and kind of made that decision, but now are trying to set things in place that they can remain there longer than maybe they could otherwise. And so in brief, it allows for some extra supports in a home setting, practical things from personal care, helping with things like bathing, dressing, some of those kinds of supports, to practical things around the house with meals, and then really just looking at how do we take this individual or this couple and allow them to flourish, maintain a high quality of life, given the circumstances and given the things we know, and also just realizing the things that we don't know as we're heading into the future with them.
So many questions that we'll get is, when do I need to even consider this? So I heard you say, stay at home, quality of life, help with the dressing, those kinds of things. When I think of, and I know many of us have personally walked through this with our parents or loved ones, to get you involved at what level? That's probably our biggest question. When do you feel like, hey, if this is happening, you may want to start asking questions if you are a child or a loved one observing. Yeah. So can we start at that level, John, of how you would be like, hey, if you start seeing this or that, maybe you better start having those questions?
Yes. Probably as with a lot of life, it often feels like dialogue and communication is helpful. There are topics, obviously you're dealing with families' resources, finances, and those can be difficult conversations at points, or at least in our heads. Maybe sometimes we get stuck and we kind of feel like, I'm not sure how to address it, who to address it with. But really, I think what I would say to that is as soon as there is a sense of concern, as soon as there's a sense of question that's coming up, rather than holding that, or maybe thinking, I'm not sure if anybody else is dealing with this, or this seems like a new thing to me, not sure what to do with it. Opening up a dialogue is really helpful. And I think often families find, or individuals find very quickly, that the questions they're asking are very common ones, just not necessarily common in their own life and sort of experience. And also that they are relevant questions that are very important to be asking. And the earlier that some of those things begin to be anticipated, I think the more options that really end up opening up for the individuals they're concerned about. And oftentimes the later those questions get asked. If you wait until mom's in the hospital after a fall and trying to figure out what the options are then, that happens often, and there's ways through that. But if it starts several steps before that, much kind of much more capacity to be effective in the planning, in the thinking, in the anticipating, and it just works well.
Right. Well, and I know many of you have asked me, you may be living alone, and therefore that really becomes more of an obvious question, John, when you're by yourself. But if you're with a loved one or your spouse, you kind of look at them as your caregiver, and we see that many times. We'll see that piece of the puzzle. But as we're looking forward, you'll say to me, I just don't know if I want to talk to the kids about this. But in the same breath, you'll also say, I don't want to be a burden to my family. So I guess what I would want to encourage is, if that's you and you're feeling that way, let's have a conversation with me or with anyone on our team. But then there's also, I want you to be aware that there's companies out there and people like John who really can help with that next step. What do I do? So John, can you kind of walk us through, here in Lancaster County, we are really blessed with many options for care. But when we look on the broad scheme, they may look different. But can you kind of give us a broad overview of what these different facilities are?
We are blessed in Lancaster County to have quite a few retirement communities, continuing care retirement communities. A lot of them have a faith tradition that they've been kind of born out of. A lot of them have been here for a long time. And I know that as you kind of travel throughout the country in different geographic areas, you're going to find different resources available. A lot of them, I think, will still tend to track with the same general structures, but the makeup of how many are available in a certain area obviously is going to be much different depending where you are. I think that here, again, continuing care retirement communities, the nonprofit CCRCs, as we would call them, often will have that there's definitely an entry process to get into them. But in many cases, once you are part of that continuum of care and they have received you into the care process, even in independent living or in still a very independent setting in those situations, maybe an apartment or a cottage or a condo kind of a setting, you're really in there for life if you want to be. And they've basically guaranteed, even if you run out of funds, that there's some effort being made to continue to guarantee that you'll have care through the end of life. So there's a peace of mind that often is found in that, associated with that. That's great. There are also facilities that would be kind of more specialized. So you would have a skilled nursing facility that would just have skilled care, a place perhaps someone that would go with a diagnosis who doesn't anticipate maybe being able to walk independently again, or that would have, again, certain diagnoses that kind of put them in a place where skilled nursing is going to be necessary. And then there would be personal care settings where somebody could choose to move towards, that would have a variety of supports available, from help with meals being prepared to laundry to medication reminders. And so for a certain season of life in the aging process, that can be just a very effective way of providing a safe, comfortable, enjoyable environment for an individual or couple to be. And then obviously, as we've talked about, the whole home care industry really can provide support in someone's home in the community, on a retirement community campus, in a personal care setting, and sometimes there's just a variety of reasons why somebody might choose to have some home care temporarily because of a setback that's healing, or on an ongoing basis to remain at a certain level of care and not need to move, say, from personal care into skilled, but be able to, with some support, stay in a personal care or independent living setting.
So if an individual would anticipate they need in-home care or some kind of help, because I know that you mentioned now, and I think I heard this, that more and more of the community gives, they are kind of getting rid of that area of employees. And so now we're seeing more and more of your type of a company. Those employees are coming in to help at the community level. What would be the steps to get there?
The steps to receiving care or receiving support from the retirement community to maybe a skilled nursing facility to home care, they're all going to look a little bit different. Again, kind of going back to what we talked about earlier, I think often opening up dialogue and moving towards an organization, moving towards an industry. So it could be several calls to a number of home care providers or to a number of retirement communities that just start to educate someone. Occasionally, it is the client that we end up caring for who calls us. More often, it's a family member, it's a son, a daughter. I think statistically, it's the youngest daughter who often is making that phone call. If you just look at the pure statistics of it, and obviously, it could be another person in that person's support community, a neighbor, a friend, someone who's kind of walked with them. But really opening up the dialogue. And I feel like what's most helpful often, what we experience is we get a phone call like that, say from a daughter of someone who's struggling health-wise because of the aging process. And usually we'll have a conversation on the phone, 20 minutes or so, kind of understand what the situation is. And many times then set up a time to go out and visit with the person that's calling along with the potential client often at that client's home. And just sit in the living room and really just have a conversation, understand the bigger picture of what's happening, and then begin to open up some options, some different things that person might want to consider in the near term and also in the longer term. And a lot of times it's kind of how the financial element, a significant piece is how the financial element for them plays into the picture of what they're kind of looking at. And there's often not a right or a wrong. It's really kind of trying to understand who's the client, what's the family structure that's around them or the community structure around them, and then what do both of those parties, if you will, want, prefer, and then how do you kind of merge those together in a healthy way that also, from a professional standpoint, gets the care for that person that they really need and deserve. So it's a kind of unique process. On the retirement community standpoint, it probably looks more like a phone call to somebody in their admissions office and then a visit there. And again, I would suggest often having a couple of those conversations at a couple different places will give just a rounded out perspective of what the culture of a retirement community or campus is like, what that community is like, and also kind of opens up what some different options look like. If it's a skilled nursing setting, a lot of times those the entry to those is going to look more like a hospitalization that then turns into a need for rehab or that turns into a need for skilled care, short-term or long-term, and then a transition. And again, speaking very broadly about that and lots of different things that will end up impacting the process. But that often is a bit more of a decision that's made for somebody based on their health status in a current situation, and also on what they've done to prepare so thus far in their journey. And that's where a little bit of preparation up front, asking the questions early, opens up some more options, even if an emergency does come up, as opposed to waiting.
Right. So we'll pick on the youngest daughter.
Yes.
When she calls, from your perspective, because we let you guys know that you need your healthcare power of attorneys and your financial power of attorney documents. So when they're calling in, I mean, you're obviously trying to gauge, how much do I take? Because there's always, I guess, the possibility that someone thinks mom's needing help when mom doesn't really need help. So that's a little juggling act on your part. Yes. But do you require the document to be able to speak with them freely, or do you just more set it up with the individual that's being considered?
Yes, that's a great question. So for that initial conversation, we usually don't require a document. Okay. We definitely support and encourage individuals to have those documents in place. And obviously, as they kind of move through the aging process, the transitions that are involved, it's so helpful if the legal, financial pieces are nicely situated. And if somebody knows where they are or has access to them, which I know that's something that you help to quarterback for people, which is a beautiful thing. So, but we don't require it. We usually have again, a phone conversation. It often leads to a visit with that individual that's calling as well as with the potential client. And then it really is trying to assess, I would say more often than not, the need for support probably is there and probably has been there. And if anything that would be common, the person calling feels a little bit out of their league in terms of not sure even what questions to ask. Very common and totally understandable, and should not delay somebody from making that phone call. And then also, usually it's a case once we kind of get into some conversation of like, oh, I should have made this call 6 months ago or 2 years ago or whatever the time frame is. But usually it's not a situation where somebody's jumping the gun. It's usually like they've been kind of dragging on it for a while, and finally they're just at a place like we're just not sure where to turn or what to do next.
Well, from that statement then, John, what would you say are some of those huge red flags that if you see, like because you've been doing this for quite a few years, I mean, what are some of those things that are like trigger moments where it's like, oh, if you're the daughter, we're picking on the daughter again, if this is going on, let's have a conversation.
Yes.
That's kind of where I'm going at. Or if you as the individual are hearing these different thoughts. I mean, what are some of those triggers, John?
Great question, and a broad one again. I'll throw out a few. There's probably a bunch more, and but I would say, and some of it's very simple. It would be if an individual who's walking through the aging process does have family around them locally, geographically. It's pretty common for that family structure to help out with buying groceries, to help out with maybe balancing the checkbook, with just kind of like some of the day-to-day stuff. Hey, I can even maybe help with some cleaning or things, just help mom or dad kind of keep going in their home. A lot of times, once there is a need for some support with personal care, whether it's some help with, and it could even just be a temporary setback that creates this, or it could be something that's kind of a process of kind of recognizing, but hey, there's some need to help with bathing or with toileting or with dressing. A lot of times that's where family will kind of come towards us and say, hey, I'm totally fine to get groceries, totally fine to maybe even take mom to a doctor appointment or things, but I really don't want to necessarily get involved on the personal care side. And usually there's some other physical things happening in that journey as well, that it kind of just starts to hit a place where it's like some outside support would really be valued and appropriate. Right. A real simple thing is often finding expired food in the refrigerator and just kind of seeing like, oh, I'm not sure this is something that should be should be eaten, and as that maybe something like that comes up somewhat often. Unfortunately, sometimes it's a case where mom or dad is headed out in the car and then can't find their way back, and it's kind of this little trigger of like, wait a second, like you're not that far from home, and this is something you've done for many years, and this is kind of signifying maybe a little bit of a challenge point just with the cognitive elements, and so that can certainly be one of those things. Maybe some challenge with taking medication routinely that's important, obviously, for health purposes, and forgetting to take that or some things. And again, with all these things, there's different ways to navigate it, but those are definitely some routine signs where it just is like, okay, maybe some more intentionality around care, around support. And it doesn't even have to be a lot, but just sort of like starting a process at that point could be a good thing.
Well, and as you said that, I could just think of someone that there might be embarrassed.
Mm-hmm.
That is probably the biggest thing, is to not be embarrassed if this is happening. Because
entirely.
Would you agree with that?
I would totally agree with that.
And that's the part that really makes me sad. If someone starts finding their world becoming very small, because they're afraid they'll say the wrong thing, or they're not sure about how to interact in conversations or something, or hearing loss, things of those nature. Kind of, you find yourself withdrawing. If you see one of your loved ones withdrawing, those could be also signs that we as the children could be picking up.
For sure.
But that's the piece that I think I've noticed that with individuals, where they kind of get lost in their own world, or stay in their own world.
Yes.
And that's such a sad thing, because life is so precious and we want them to live it to the fullest. So,
for sure.
Yeah.
I feel, as I mentioned, a lot of times families will call us because something is needed physically, or there's a tangible need that's there. A lot of times, as well as we get started with care, I feel like maybe the largest value that we bring in some cases is relationship. And it literally is helping that person who is started to maybe pull back into their own space because of hearing loss, because of mobility getting more challenging, those kinds of things. All of a sudden, it's like that relationship and just somebody, especially again, if there's not really people around to be able to navigate with during the day or things, just creates a real significant value there. So we love to do all the things that are helpful around the house for an individual's care, but also just create that relational element.
I think that's a good point, John, because sometimes that's part of what your individuals are doing. They're coming into the home and they're just being there socially.
Yes.
It's somebody to just have in your presence. I know some people, the activities, the level of activity is going down, but they just want someone there with them.
Yeah.
And you'll notice that many times as you're getting, if you're the child going out the door and, mom's going, oh, and by the way, and you've been there for 4 hours and they just don't want to see you leave.
I remember one of those sons who called us on the phone and he talked about his mom, and he was local and he very faithfully stopped to visit with her after work every day, which is kind, and it's a daily connection, all that kind of thing, which is great. But he made the comment, if I arrive at mom's house after work at 5 or 6 p.m. and no one has been there at all that day, I feel like she's actually almost like still sleeping, or like it's almost like the light of her soul has not been turned on yet. If I arrive and someone's already kind of connected with her at some point during the day, then I feel like I'm arriving to mom who's like already like engaged and kind of moving and in things. So if you think about that, there are just a lot of people that spend a lot of time alone. And that is hard.
It is hard.
So that's one of the beauties.
Yeah, and I feel like the past 2 years we've done such a disservice to our seniors. To many of them, it's been a very challenging time. So, well, a couple other questions, if we could, before we kind of wrap up. Let's talk a little bit about how do I pay for this, John? I mean, what are some ways, some creative ways that you've seen?
So often when people come to us, they're struggling, and families are struggling, and they're concerned, and there's again just a level. There's potentially some physical pain, but there's also probably the pain of the unknown of what does the future hold. How long is the future? And like, what's it going to look like? And we don't know. We just don't know. And in those situations, I think people are reminded of that in a way that they may not be otherwise or think about every day. So long-term care insurance, it's not the vast majority of people that have purchased that, but if they have, don't cancel it. Keep it.
Yeah, 100%. Even though the premiums are going up.
Even though it's expensive, keep it. If you've already been paying for the last 10 years, 20 years, it's always the saddest thing when someone says, yeah, I had one of those and I paid for 20 years, but then I canceled it last year. Like, oh no. So that can be a great resource for sure. Home care as a whole is not covered by Medicare, so it really is an out-of-pocket expense. It's part of what an individual's savings ends up being utilized for in terms of the care process. And hear a lot individuals saying, but I want this money to be left for my kids. I don't want to spend it. And oh my goodness, like that's entirely understandable and a great approach from a standpoint of generosity and a parent's heart. I hear a lot of kids saying, we want the peace of mind of knowing that mom and dad are okay. So if they would just spend what it takes to know that they're okay, then like I'll be better today and tomorrow and in this season of life. So it's a juggle in that. But again, sometimes it's obviously using funds that have been saved in various capacities to pay for the services. There are times when family will come in around and provide some help with that. Again, parents in many cases really are working hard to make sure that doesn't need to happen. We want to have a good conversation around finances with somebody at the beginning of the process and ongoing to make sure that there's a cognition of just what's involved cost-wise. And that no one ends up in a situation where they feel like they have been put in a place where they can't afford the care that they're asking for. And if there is a situation where we realize up front, hey, this may be difficult to to pay for just based on funds available, then really kind of getting creative with that, or looking at, okay, what are other solutions to be looking at? How else can we help to direct or navigate?
And I think that's something that we want to remind everyone, that if you're feeling you're in that stage of life, let's really sit down and have a conversation, because we can look at their finances and kind of determine what are the next steps. How are we going to pay for this? But I do hear the children often say, I just want mom or dad to spend their money. That's what we want. Well, as we wrap up, John, is there anything else that you could share?
Before we started, I wrote down 2 words, and they were relationship and communication. And they relate to life, not necessarily to aging, but they apply entirely in the aging process. And I think that they really kind of become and or continue to be themes in it, that the relationships you develop, the communication you're able to have together, seeing parents engage with their children around topics that can feel very difficult, like a hurdle to kind of get over, or maybe around finances, around planning, around health. At the same time, when those doors open up and there's an ability to be communication, oh my goodness, it just creates more strength, more capacity, more options. It takes the mystery out of things. It brings peace of mind for, I think, the next generation, as well as the generation that's walking through the process. Aging is probably one of the most character revealing, challenging time frames in some ways that I have only begun to more fully appreciate in the last decade or so. So hats off to people that are kind of walking through that. It's a living it out in real time.
John, thank you. Thank you so much. And if you find you have some more questions, give the office a call. We'll be happy to continue the conversation. John is just one of many that offer this service, but we really appreciate you taking the time to sit down and just sharing. I mean, I just appreciate your heart. And I know it's a business, but I also know it's a business that your heart is fully engaged in. And that's what I think is pretty special about you and your company. So thanks again, John. And next month, we're excited to have Tony Montgomery with Assured Partners about Medicare and getting Medicare insurance and weaving through that whole challenge, I like to call it, but he knows that business inside and out. So we're looking forward to Tony coming next month and sharing his thoughts. So again, John, thank you. Thank you very much. We appreciate your time. And as always, I hope you have a great day. Thanks.